and I want to welcome you this evening. I guess this is the first session this semester of a course on challenges to security and stability in Central and Eastern Europe. And this evening, the topic is the new administration's policy towards Eastern and Central Europe. We're 5 days into the administration. I know you're all wondering how we're going to figure out what the policy is at this point. But we actually couldn't have two better people to talk about this. Professor David Cameron, whom I'm sure you all know, Professor of Political Science and Director of the European Studies Program here at the Macmillan Center, and also Yuriy Sergeyev, a Senior Fellows in the European Studies Program, but also more notably a former permanent representative of Ukraine at the United Nations, and has a long career in the Ukrainian diplomatic corps. Unfortunately, the third person is me, and I am going to kick this off. I think we're going to do this from the table because we are recording. And my topic is actually sort of the Russian part of this problem. And as I said, it is, in fact, very difficult to talk about something that doesn't exist. But I'll do the best that I can at this point. It's very difficult right now to get a sense of what this administration is going to do with Russia, in part because what we have to go on are very contradictory statements that President Trump made during the election campaign, internally inconsistent. I think the press here focused a lot on his very warm words about President Putin, about the statements he made that were contrary to longstanding American bipartisan foreign policy, particularly the statements about NATO, and very much speculation that Trump himself and his team were close to the Kremlin in some way. But if you paid more attention to what Trump said during the election campaign, you will also remember things that he said that aren't going to be to Moscow's liking. He wants to undo the Iranian nuclear deal, something that the Russians worked very hard to put together and are committed to, much the way the other negotiating partners in that process were. Trump talked about modernization of the American military, more military spending, modernization of our nuclear force, continued commitment to missile defense. Also, issues that don't warm the hearts of people sitting in the Kremlin. And so the real question here, as we're in the initial phases of this administration, is how do you translate what are really sort of vague sentiments and attitudes and internally contradictory remarks into a concrete, coherent policy. Now, what I would normally say in a situation like this is that a lot is going to depend not simply on President Trump, a lot is going to depend on who he has on his team. We know some of the initial picks at state, at defense, the National Security Council, and so forth. And what is interesting about this is not only do these men, and they're all men at this point, have differing views among themselves as to what the policy should be towards Russia, have interacted with the Russians in different ways over the past decade or more. But in their confirmation hearings, a number of people contradicted what the president-elect had said during the election campaign. Madison Tillerson, in particular, understanding continued support for NATO as a keystone of American foreign policy and our role in the world. And so how these men are going to work together and how they're going to formulate a policy is a big question mark at this point. But beyond that, those aren't the individuals who are really going to do what we would call the grunt work in the government of formulating the policy, presenting the options that these men are then going to debate and consider. And until we see who's going to fill sort of the second and third tier in the administration, who's going to be the deputies at Defense and over at the State Department, who are going to be the undersecretaries, who are going to be the individuals that are actually in charge of Russia policy day in and day out at the State Department, the National Security Council, and over at the Defense Department, the Office of the Secretary of Defense. It's going to be very difficult to get a fix on what this policy is going to look like. So that's the first point. The second point I would underscore is that, again, despite what you may be reading about in the American press, it's not going to be easy to develop a policy, nor is it going to be easy to rebuild or restart relations with Russia. In this regard, I think it's notable that the Kremlin, again, despite what you've read in the press about their being happy with Trump's election, that they're looking forward to to working with him, Kremlin spokesmen have repeatedly said, foreign ministry spokesmen have repeatedly said, we don't expect any easy turnaround in this relationship. We're not looking for an early meeting with President Trump to work out some sort of grand bargain. What I know from my own experience with dealing with the Kremlin over the years, in and out of government, is the Kremlin likes to prepare these meetings. They're going to want to have a joint statement. They don't want to travel someplace and have Putin sit down with Trump and on the spot come up with something that they can deliver as a common position to the outside world. It's going to take a lot of preparation. I think the Russians are also right that we should minimize the very deep differences that remain between the United States. Certainly the relationship has deteriorated perhaps more than it should have in the past 2 or 3 years, but there are fundamental differences that have to be worked out. Fundamental differences about, if not so much the principles of world order, certainly how you interpret those principles in the modern period. There are fundamental differences about how we deal with questions like Syria and Ukraine. There are fundamental differences about what the structure of European security should be going forward. And there are fundamental differences of how we should organize this strategic relationship. None of these things can be solved by a phone conversation between the two presidents. None of them can be solved by an early meeting. The most you could expect out of an early meeting is an agenda, issues that the two countries think that they need to work on as priorities, with perhaps some agreements being reached during the course of the year, sometime in the fall, if not later than that. Now, if you were to ask me to speculate on what that agenda is going to look like, I think it's quite straightforward at this point. 3 big issues that will be on the minds of the people in the Kremlin, on the minds of the people in the White House, and the top levels of this new American administration, and 3 issues that really have to be addressed straightforwardly if you're going to make any effort to diffuse the tensions in relations and put these things on a perhaps more constructive track. We're going to have to deal with the Syria problem, we're going to have to deal with the Ukraine problem, and we're going to have to deal with a whole host of issues connected with European security, particularly the way we deal with movements of military forces in the regions along the border between NATO and Russia, the way we deal with strategic reconnaissance around Europe, and NATO reconnaissance around Russia. It's hard to see what the outlines of agreements might be. As I said, the differences are quite steep. There's some people who think that there's an easy trade-off between the United States giving up on its position that Assad has to go in cooperation against ISIS. But if you look more closely at this, part of the problem we have had with the Russians in Syria over the past couple of years is inability to come to a common definition of who the real terrorists are, who we're fighting against in common, that's something that's not going to go away in the very near term. On Ukraine, a lot of speculation as to what might be done, but no real good way forward at this point. There's a sanctions regime, there's a Minsk process in place. Very little has been done. It's hard for me to imagine an American administration simply lifting sanctions or easing sanctions without some concrete steps by the Russians to alleviate the concerns about what they've done in Crimea and eastern Ukraine over the past 2 years. And I think it's certainly true that no matter what a Trump White House might want to do, they're going to have to deal with very stiff resistance in the Congress to some of these things. And the same thing is true of European security architecture. I think all of this, of course, has been made more difficult in the current period because of the concerns about Russia's role in the last presidential campaign. The hacking, what the intelligence community has determined was a concerted effort by Russia, supported out of the Kremlin, to discredit the American political process, and in the later stages of the campaign to prepare the grounds for a Trump victory. So again, I think it's going to be very difficult. The only things that I expect in the very near term are, one, an effort to open up the channels of communication that have been frozen since the eruption of the Ukraine crisis. You can't conduct a relationship like this simply at the level of foreign minister and secretary of state, punctuated periodically by phone calls between the two presidents. There really is a need to open up all the channels of communications that we normally use in any bilateral relationship, if for no other reason, to have a better understanding of how the Russians look at a global situation, what actions they might take in order to reduce the risk that the very sort of tense relationships we have at this point might spill out of control into a conflict that neither country wants at this point. I think we will continue to see an effort, certainly by the White House, to de-demonize Putin, to present him as at least someone that we can talk to, that we can deal with. To my mind, also a step forward, no matter what you might think about the nature of Russian foreign policy, of Russian domestic politics, to conduct any type of normal diplomatic dialogue, you have to at least be on speaking terms with the leaders of the foreign countries. We don't do this with any other major relationship in the world. It's hard to imagine a president of the United States calling Xi a thug and someone that we shouldn't be dealing with, or a war criminal at this point, no matter what you think the facts on the ground might demonstrate. So we'll see a little bit of that, and then we'll have to wait, as I said, for the president to fill out the administration, to get a sense of who's really going to be in charge and what their attitudes might tell us about what the nature of any agreements on Syria, Ukraine, and European security might be in the very near future. So with that, let me turn it over to Ambassador Sergeyev to talk about the Ukrainian angle on this.
Thank you, Tom, for too loud. It's okay. It's okay. It works.
Turn it on.
That is, it works. Thank you for introducing me. Again, because the computer is standing. Well, it is on human nature to create illusions, to live with them, and to fall in sorrow when losing them, and to return back in a little while to produce new illusions. Ukraine lived with a good bunch of illusions for the last 2.5 decades. One of them, guarantees of our state security under the so-called Budapest Memorandum. One of Ukraine's security guarantors, Russia, invaded in Ukraine in March 2014, and then launched military conflict on the east of Ukraine, there were expectations that the rest four guarantors would act efficiently to stop the aggressor. It did not happen. Aggressor is still there. As the new year begins, Ukraine faces at least three fundamental questions. Can it put an end to Russia's aggression and reassert sovereignty over its territory? Can it count on the West, including United States solidarity and assistance, in Ukraine's self-defense? Would it be illusionary for Ukraine to hope that the United States will keep sanctions against Russia until Crimea is returned to Ukraine, and that the new administration will support the last year United States Congress decision to provide Ukraine with sophisticated weaponry, including lethal? We have had, as Tom said, different comments during electoral campaign and recently. Just to remind you, in August 2015, then candidate Mr. Trump told a political rally in Northern Carolina that Europeans and wealthy Germany in particular should do more to reverse Russia's annexation of Crimea, and he would not care if Ukraine joined NATO. On September 12, 2015, Donald Trump addressed by satellite feed a gathering of the European Elite Forum named Yes in Ukrainian capital and expressed support for Ukraine. I quote, "My feeling toward the Ukraine is very, very strong." He said that Ukraine was, I quote, "not getting the support that you need and deserve." Mr. Trump also suggested that President Barack Obama was partly responsible for Russian President Vladimir Putin's aggression by paying only lip service to reversing Russia's seizure of Ukraine's Crimea. I quote, "Our president is not strong and he is not doing what he should be doing for the Ukraine." I repeat exactly what said. The Ukraine is not correct. Trump said, part of the problem that the Ukraine has with the United States is that Putin does not respect our president whatsoever. All over the year of 2016, we have heard from the same candidate fully opposite. Mr. Trump has suggested lifting sanctions on Russia and recognizing Crimea's illegal annexation. President Trump's inauguration statement did not specify a new administration strategy towards any particular state or region. We can only guess what do some of the accents in President's statement might mean for Ukraine. For example, President stated, I quote, "We have defended our nation's borders while refusing to defend our other nations' borders while refusing to defend our own, and spent trillions and trillions of dollars overseas." Does it mean that Ukraine cannot count on assistance it got previously for modernization of its army to resist foreign aggression? Does it mean that new administration will not support 5094 Stability and Democracy for Ukraine Act, the United States House of Representatives passed unanimously last year? What the following part of the statement might mean for Ukraine, I quote, "We will reinforce old alliances and form new ones." The first part sounds as encouraging if it is about NATO, to whom Ukraine is a partner for peace and whose model is being currently implemented for reformation of Ukraine's army. Just to remind you that during the presidential campaign, Mr. Trump questioned the NATO alliance and said members need to do more to earn the US support. The president's maxim about all the new alliances raises the question, does new administration count Ukraine among its allies, old or new? If not, should Ukraine hope to get this status? What should be done for that? Of course, we should discern stances and discourses of Mr. Trump as a candidate, as president-elect, and as sworn-in president. It is obvious that tactics and strategies are different before and after elections. Now we are attentively following the stances and discourses of President's team nominees, and we await actions on decision-making, decision-taking, and decision-implementing. In Ukraine, it has been taken as promising some of President Trump's nominees' recent statements. Unexpected for many Ukrainians were Rex Tillerson remarks during the recent Senate Committee on Foreign Affairs hearing on confirmation of his appointment as the US Secretary of State. Mr. Tillerson stated, when asked if he believed Russians had a legal claim to Crimea after the later rejoined the former via referendum in March 2014, I quote, "No, that was a taking of territory that was not theirs." He also stated, I quote, "It is important to help Ukrainians protect themselves from further aggression. I hope that the ceasefire regime will be maintained, but if it will not happen, it is important for us to support the ability for self-defense." End of quote. Mr. Tillerson accented that the taking of Crimea was an act of force, and so it required a proportional act, a proportional show of force. He repeated Mr. Trump's criticism of Obama's administration response to Crimea as weak. The United States should have assisted Ukraine in a military response when the disagreement over Crimea rejoining Russia began. Mr. Tillerson stated, "I would have recommended that the Ukraine take all of these military assets it had available, put them on that eastern border, provide those assets with defensive weapons that are necessary just to defend themselves." End of quote. Mr. Tillerson noted he would have also announced that the United States was going to provide them intelligence, and there either NATO or United States will provide surveillance over the border to monitor any movements. In this passage, Mr. Tillerson made a promising gesture towards NATO. It is important to note that practically simultaneously, Kremlin has also criticized former US administration for its position on Ukraine. The Kremlin spokesman, Dmitry Peskov, stated, I quote, "The position of the previous US administration under former US President Barack Obama on Ukraine was unproductive. After above-mentioned hearings in the Senate for Ukraine, it is still not clear. Will new administration keep sanctions against Russia or not? Ambiguity is coming not only from Trump candidate's stance, but also from his nominee Tillerson's stance in Senate when being asked whether he believes now is the right time to lift Ukraine's related sanctions. He said, I quote, "I would leave things in the status quo, so we are able to convey this can go either way." Being asked whether he supported helping Ukraine with lethal arms in response to the continued aggressive actions by Russia, Tillerson said, I quote, "This decision requires consultations with the National Council for Security and the contribution of others, but I would support it." A very diplomatic answer, which confirms that next administration decision will be most probably decision of a team. It is important to understand now exactly US-Russia future relations are reflected in new administration's practice when Tillerson unexpectedly claimed that Russia has to take responsibility for its actions and that their NATO allies are, I quote, "right to be alarmed at a resurgent Russia." He stated that, I quote, "Russia today is a threat, but she is not unpredictable in the promotion of their own interest. She invaded the Ukraine, including the Crimea, captured and supported the Syrian army, which violates the laws of war," he said. And confronted with Russian President Vladimir Putin's actions in Ukraine and Syria and against domestic political enemies, Tillerson said he would need more information before agreeing with Senator Rubio's description of the Russian leader as a war criminal. Let me move fast. Mr. Trump suggested in a recent interview with the Wall Street Journal that counterterrorism cooperation with Russia would be a reason enough to lift the sanctions the Obama administration has levied for Russian interference in the presidential elections. As he put it, I quote, "If you get along and if Russia is really helping us, why would anybody have sanctions if somebody is doing some really great things?" Will new administration, when approaching practically this idea, understand that Russia is not an appropriate partner for that for several reasons? Primarily because Russia itself is a terrorism sponsoring state. Example, Ukraine. It was stated on many occasions with proofs at the United Nations meeting on countering financial terrorism. Russian counterterrorism has never been about doing really great things. Examples, Dagestan, Chechnya, and recently Syria. Russia is a sponsor of cyber terror. Will new administration learn Ukraine's lessons to understand that making deal with Russia does not work? Russia violated all bilateral agreements with Ukraine. At least we in Ukraine now fully understand Stalin's encyclical. I quote, Stalin said, "Agreements are like pie crusts made to be broken." Agreements for Russia, therefore, as somebody rightly noted, are simply part of disguising, intended to divert attention, to placate, to confuse, to buy time. In Ukraine, we are following other nominees whose positions on Ukraine also leave questions mostly connected with their previous support of Ukraine. The questions are whether the new administration as a team accepts new head of Pentagon, retired Marine Corps General Mattis' previous position, calling Russian aggression against Ukraine in Crimea and Donbass, I quote, much more severe, more serious than Washington and the European Union were treating it, end of quote. Whether the new administration as a team accepts the new CIA Director Mike Pompeo's stance on Ukraine, who, when visiting Ukraine in April 2014, stated that the aim of Russian President Vladimir Putin was to make control over the whole Ukraine, and stressed, I quote, to the degree that we can demonstrate support for Ukrainian government, we can change Putin's calculus and increase the risk to him and to Russia for moving combatant forces closer to Kyiv. And so on and so forth, to save time for questions. Of course, we should accept and respect the main line of US foreign policy President Trump highlighted in his inauguration statement: America is first. At the same time, we do encourage new US administration to follow American commitments of the past. Among them, Budapest Memorandum, US sponsorship of United Nations Resolution, Territorial Integrity of Ukraine of March 27, 2014, and others. Of course, we did hear President Trump's invitation to perform together, not only for United States expense. Partnership is not only what we want or expect from others for ourselves, but we want what we can offer. That's fine with me, yeah.
Very good. And now to deal with the rest of Central East Europe. David?
Okay, well, thank you, and thank you everyone for being here. It's very hard to talk about what will happen in this new administration. It's probably the least predictable administration that any of us have ever encountered, I think. There's sort of an element where the policy more or less depends on what the next tweet says, and which will be probably deleted a few hours later. There are some really, I think there is a number of, well, the first thing I would say is it seems to me, the important issue in the change of administration has to do with the literally thousands of people who will be appointed to positions at all levels, and especially in this case in the State Department, the NSC, and Defense, and also in the intelligence community. And the one thing you can say about this administration, I think, compared with others in the recent past, is that they've moved very slowly, and we don't really have a sense of who will be working in a lot of the positions that are now available and open, and many of them will have to go through a complex approval process. So it does seem to me that I would be surprised if we have any major changes in the near future just for that reason. I think one of the messages that came out very loudly and clearly in the inauguration is the isolationist tone of America first. And it seems to me that creates a problem for a number of the countries in Central and Eastern Europe who don't want to hear an isolationist position from the US. If you think of Latvia or Estonia. On the other hand, it's probably fine with a number of countries that are moving a little bit more, I wouldn't say into the Russian orbit, but have leaderships that are more willing to live and let live and work with Putin. And we've seen a number of changes, whether it's Moldova or Bulgaria or some of the changes in Poland. And of course, we have the theme of illiberal democracies being elaborated by Orban and Duda in Poland. And so the isolationism creates a problem for some of the countries of Central and Eastern Europe, it seems to me. And it also creates an opening for Russian involvement in a variety of ways, many diplomatic, economic, political, the usual. The risk is that we will leave that area, which is it's a complex area with a lot of complex names. And despite the fact that the president is married to a Slovenian, it's not clear that how engaged he will be in this particular area. It seems to me that there are a number of more specific problems in dealing with Central and Eastern Europe. One that has been on the agenda for a long time is NATO and strengthening NATO and strengthening cost sharing, getting the foot draggers up to at least 2% of GDP a year. And we've taken under Obama an important step in placing troops on rotation within Eastern Europe, and that seems to me to be a useful step to take. But that's on the agenda, and when you have a president who raises, as a candidate who raises questions about NATO, you can only hope that people such as General Mattis will ultimately win the discussion on merits, on perhaps IQ, and that issue will be dealt with, and NATO will be strengthened. But there is, and you remember from the campaign, there is an existential question about NATO and what the purpose of NATO is. Obviously, it was a different world when it was created in '49, and we still haven't entirely figured out what its role should be in the post-'89 era. It seems to me that there's a second big problem that remains, which is Ukraine, and part of the problem is sanctions, and whether the sanctions should be rolled over or extended or continued, or even, and there were a number of Europeans who thought they should be strengthened because of what happened in Syria. Unfortunately, the humanitarian catastrophe of Aleppo and has receded from the news, so that people have forgotten what happened there. But there is that issue that has to be resolved. There's a more important issue in a way than the sanctions, it seems to me, which is the question of Minsk II and what happens with that settlement or that second effort to develop some kind of settlement of the Ukraine conflict that involved constitutional change, acceptance of and control over the border, the eastern border, a number of you might say quid pro quos, some of which rely on Ukraine to enact legislation, and that hasn't been forthcoming on the constitutional reform issue. And that has to be, it seems to me, that should be pushed, although I'm not sure, I don't have any sense that that will be pushed by the administration. A third issue, it seems to me, that is important, it's exemplified by Viktor Orban, but other leaders as well in Central and Eastern Europe, that the EU has lost a certain amount of attraction, you might say, for the Central and Eastern Europeans. Eurozone crisis, refugee issue. We still have a virtually non-existent program of resettlement that was accepted in September of 2015. We have, obviously with Brexit and with the rise of populism in Europe, the EU isn't a very attractive model and is losing some of its capacity to exert leadership, I think, in Central and Eastern Europe. And that leaves these countries with a little more leeway to do whatever they want to do politically. And it doesn't seem that much happens if Viktor Orban takes a particular position or the Polish government takes a particular position on the constitutional court. So there's a problem from that issue, although it's not necessarily one that the president regards as a problem. I think I get a sense that he's quite at ease thinking about some of those leaders as potential friends. I think there's a big issue on the agenda, an unresolved issue, and this gets into the NATO problem to some extent, of European security. And in particular the CFSP, the Common Foreign and Security Policy. One of the major features of the Treaty on European Union was to create a CFSP, a commitment to a common foreign and security policy. There was some talk after the Brexit referendum that this might actually be accelerated because of the UK's departure. Because the UK, being tied more closely to the US and to the Atlantic relationship and to NATO, was inhibiting the development of a CFSP in the way that, say, the French and the Germans might choose to move. But it seems to me that as you look at the scene now in Western Europe, there's very little commitment or interest in developing the CFSP in a more robust way to deal with the issues that we see in terms of states on the with borders that they share with Russia, for example. We don't see much in the way of strengthening it, expanding its resources and capabilities, as far as I can see anyway. Europe is becoming increasingly preoccupied with its own internal political problems, whether you're talking about France and Marine Le Pen and who the socialists would nominate for president, or Angela Merkel's election result possibilities in September, or whether Wilders will become the largest party in the Netherlands. Europe has become, as a result of these crises, become very preoccupied internally, and I joked in a class at the end of the last semester. I think at the rate we were going, my course on the EU would be in the history department next year, there's a real issue about European security, I think, that we need to, we as a country need to deal with. And all of this comes back then to a president who appreciates Putin's machismo, who questions NATO, who's not very comfortable with the sanctions, who's put some very good people on his security team, Kelly and Mattis, but he's also put some people I would regard as dubious characters, such as Flynn, in an important position. And we really don't know how this government is going to function, so we're in a position where we have a lot of problems in Europe, it seems to me. The Europeans have a lot of problems in Europe, and I think we're waiting to see whether this administration will step up and start dealing with these problems. Obviously not after 5 days, but you want to see people in there who are capable of figuring out what should be done. And so we're in early days, obviously, but it's a grim situation, I think, from the point of view of many in Central and Eastern Europe.
Thank you, David. So 3 optimistic introductions. I think we all agree that it's come back and ask us a little bit later about what the policy really is. There are a lot of problems out there, and so far just a lot of question marks as to how this administration is going to deal with them. We have about 45 minutes for discussion, so if you have a question or a comment, please raise your hand. I will ask you to identify yourself, and if it's a question or comment, I just ask that you be as concise as possible. So right over here.
Thank you. I will go quick. I have 2 questions, one for you and one for David Cameron. With regard to your kind of basic assumption that relations with Russia should be fixed, should be kind of reinvigorated or something. These efforts that you see as forthcoming, as helpful, whether or not they will be successful, you left open. What is to be achieved? Why is this effort necessary? And don't you think that the price that it is to be likely to be paid in the process might be more detrimental, higher to the U.S. in abandoning some basic principles and some strategic interest than the achievement in influencing Russia or doing some common business with Russia and so on. And similar to Professor Cameron, you mentioned that one thing you believe the new administration should be doing is pressuring the Ukrainian government to implement its legislative part of Minsk agreement. Again, what is to be achieved here? One thing which is likely to be achieved if pressure is very strong is destabilization in Ukraine, polarization in Ukrainian political class, because some part of Ukrainian politicians will never accept those concessions which were forced upon Ukraine in those crucial days when the Russian and separatist forces advanced. And if we believe that Russia will be kind of lured into truly respecting Ukraine's sovereignty after that, is it realistic, do you think? Thank you.
Why don't you start, David?
Oh, okay. Yeah, I think, well, I'm going to start by mentioning, sort of responding a bit to your question to Tom, which is that it seems every administration does a reset with Russia. That's sort of the normal thing, right? You try to correct the frozen relationship that is developed with Russia and dealing with Putin in particular. And so we went through that with Obama, with Hillary Clinton as Secretary of State, and Michael McFaul and as ambassador. And we will probably go through that again, I would think, with the Secretary of State. who's had many negotiations and dealings over energy policy and oil exploration. I expect that'll happen again. It's almost a involuntary reaction with a new administration. But I do think there's a need for the U.S. and Russia to try to I wouldn't say cut a grand bargain, but deal with a number of these issues simultaneously. Now, the problem, of course, is that if you take Syria as an example, we're basically on the sidelines in that, and that now involves Russia and Iran and Syria, and we're sort of watching. But it does seem to me that some of these issues need to be dealt with, and I think in terms of Ukraine, it seems to me that there's an obvious problem that Ukraine doesn't want to do anything as long as the Russians are there in the east, and as long as they control the border, and they would like to be able to control the border before they introduce any kind of political constitutional reforms in elections and so forth. Obviously, what's the point of having constitutional reform and elections if you don't even control the territory? And it seems to me that there has to be some way to come back to Minsk again, in Minsk III, where Francois Hollande won't be there, but probably Angela Merkel will be, and come back and revisit this, because from one point of view, the status quo is doing exactly what Russia would like. It's weakening. We have a frozen conflict. It's weakening Ukraine as a country, as an economy, and so from the Russian point of view, they would just as soon have this go on, I think, for the indefinite future, and don't have much of an interest in resolving it. But it does seem to me that that's an area where, if we were involved in it with Ukraine and the Europeans, and could exercise some leverage on other issues that matter to Russia, I'm not sure what they are exactly, but it might have to do with oil, it might have to do with the price of oil, it might have to do with economic assistance of some kind, because that economy is in difficulty. It does seem to me that there's at least some space where there could be some kind of negotiation or sustained negotiation, separate from the usual reset, with the reset button where you just start again.
But you're talking more about pressure in Russia than pressure in Ukraine, right?
Well, yeah. I can understand why Ukraine won't do much right now, and for political reasons as well, because of the political composition in the Rada and so forth. But no one could expect Ukraine to just say, okay, we're going to do everything that Minsk II said, and then hope that the Russians will think we're, good people and will do their part of it. Obviously, there has to be some kind of simultaneous, or there's actually a debate about which steps come first and what the sequence should be. And Minsk II never resolved that issue of the sequence. It just enumerated a list of changes that should happen, but it didn't really, at least as I read it, didn't really enumerate that kind of sequence that is needed in these in reforms, or in the changes that would have to be instituted. And the problem is, do you tie that then to sanctions and release, easing sanctions? Is that one way you do it? Ease the sanction, induce Russia to do this by easing sanctions, or not? I mean, I don't have any answer, but and hopefully there are people in the government who do have answers and will be working on this, but I can't tell you who they are right now.
I actually have a little bit different take on this. First, I don't think there's going to be a reset. There's no return to business as usual. We're in a different phase in the relationship. The three resets were the three efforts to build cooperative relations with Russia up to this point have all been conducted on the assumption that Russia was slowly integrating into the Euro-Atlantic community, that there was a common set of values that bound Russia with Europe and with the United States. I think President Putin has made quite clear over the past couple of years that he sees Russia as something different. So any effort to restore normal diplomatic relations with Russia, which I think the Trump administration will do, is going to be based on a different set of assumptions. This is not an effort to build strategic partnership. It's not an effort to build a qualitatively different relationship. It's not a strategic alliance with Russia. Russian reform, as previous administrations have said. It's really a hard-headed or hard-nosed attempt to work a relationship with Russia that advances American national interest. That's one. The second point, and the reason that you have to reach out, is because I think the first task is to reduce tension in what has become a fairly volatile relationship over the past several months, with American and NATO forces moving into the Baltics, the Russians engaging in military exercises on their side of the border, provocative strategic reconnaissance by the Russians, very active air campaigns in Syria by both the United States and Russia, and the danger that an event is going to occur that each side misinterprets, sees as much more aggressive than its intended to be, a reaction over reaction, and we find ourselves in a conflict that nobody wants. That's the reason you talk to another country, at least initially, particularly a country that you see as a rival, try to understand its mindset, what its intentions are, and try to find a way to prevent those types of confrontations from developing. Beyond that, I think you need to take a very sort of clear approach as to what you think American interests are and how you go about best advancing those. This isn't about sacrificing things to the Russians. This isn't about accepting the Russian interpretation of what's going on in the world. It's about what the United States wants, what the situation is, what's sustainable, and how's the best way to move American interests forward. I think to take the issue that you're most interested in, Ukraine, I would frame this in the following way. First, I don't think Russian foreign policy has been as successful as portrayed in much of the Western press, nor as successful as it's being portrayed in Moscow. If you're sitting in the Kremlin and looking at your economic situation and the range of security challenges that you now face along your periphery, you have to be worrying about how you're going to sustain this over the long run. Syria looks like a victory of some sort, particularly given against the background of less than robust American action in that area. But Putin thought he was going to be out very quickly. He's now in Syria for the long haul. And how you're going to sustain that over the long run has to be an issue. The Ukraine crisis is not resolved. You're going to have to maintain a considerable number of forces on your side of the Ukrainian border in order to deal with certain contingencies in eastern Ukraine that you think are contrary to your interest. You've managed to raise a threat to NATO in a way that the NATO alliance has reacted. Again, there might be concerns about how Donald Trump is going to handle this, but certainly the Europeans are much more focused on dealing with the Russian threat now than they were several years ago. The Arctic is opening up because of global warming, and for the first time in history, you actually have to defend that area. You're worried about terrorists coming out of Afghanistan in a very unstable region in Central Asia. And oh, by the way, you still have China. And no matter what you're saying about strategic partnership, the fact of the matter is that that relationship has not developed nearly as robustly as Moscow had anticipated, and particularly the Chinese haven't cut the Russians any slack on commercial deals because they can't do that with the West. So how are you going to sustain this over the long run? You may argue that sanctions haven't been the main reason you have economic problems. Maybe the decline in oil prices, it may be the lack of structural reform, but the fact of the matter is you're not going to do the structural reform because of the political situation in Moscow. And even if sanctions are a small part of the problem, they're still a part of the problem, and they prevent the type of relationship that you need with Europe and the United States to develop your economy, but also in geopolitical terms to create some type of balance or hedge against your relationship with the Chinese. So I think the Russians are in a position where they may be prepared to reconsider some of their posture. On the sanctions regime, they were renewed by the Europeans in the fall. I think that was largely a consequence of Aleppo. It's very difficult for European leaders to lift sanctions while the news was showing day in and day out a very brutal Russian-led operation against Aleppo. But you'll remember before that, there was quite a lot of talk in Europe about easing sanctions, certainly in places like Italy, Hungary, Greece, and even inside Germany, where there's a fairly robust business community that wants to have the opportunity to restore relations. As David said, Aleppo is fading in the imaginations of most people in Europe at this point. There's also a certain amount, let's be frank about it, fatigue with Ukraine. And it's fatigue not because of what's happening in eastern Ukraine in the Donbass. It's fatigue because there doesn't seem to be a concerted effort by the Ukrainian authorities to undertake the reforms that we believe they need to undertake. I think many Ukrainians believe they need to undertake to turn Ukraine into a competent state, a one that actually can be effective, in a sense, answer in a proper way what I think are the democratic yearnings of a substantial part of the Ukrainian population. So if the sanctions are weakening, and they're under a risk of being undone by the Europeans over the next several months, I think the question an American administration, would have to ask is how do we deal with this issue to maintain transatlantic unity? Because the worst thing that could happen is a break between Europe and the United States in dealing with Russia. And how do we work this issue to try to advance our interest in Ukraine, vis-a-vis Russia? The Minsk Accords are not going to be implemented. We know that. I think it's not that individual elements of it aren't important going forward, but it's not going to be a package deal. I just don't see any way that happens. And in the absence of real movement on this, I think you risk the breakdown of the sanctions regime. So my approach would be to work very closely with our European partners in an effort to maintain unity, to say, how could we ease the sanction regime in return for concrete steps by the Russians that we think are necessary, like withdrawing support, military support from eastern Ukraine, like giving back to Ukraine control of the Ukrainian side of the border and so forth. And see if something like that can be agreed with Europeans and see if it can be presented to the Russians. Again, it requires concrete steps. Some of them you may think are impossible. I think it's impossible to do it as a package, but I think if you disaggregate it, you might be able to get some positive steps that, again, serve American interests, serve European interests, I would argue, serve Ukrainian interests. I think it would also put some pressure on the government in Kiev to get serious about the reform efforts that they need to undertake to demonstrate to their potential or their supporters in Europe and the United States, that they're serious about making Ukraine the type of country we would want to see. So I think there are ways of working this where we don't pay a big price, we don't concede anything of value to the United States, but we engage in a dialogue with the Russians that has the potential to ease tension, to help resolve some outstanding issues, certainly in Europe, and I think does it from, quite frankly, what I would think is a position of strength in the West vis-a-vis a Russia that still has very serious problems.
Okay.
Yeah.
May I add something? Well, on the question about what Ukrainians should do, there are two sides of the answer, one internal and external part of the question. So internally, in Ukraine, I think that we should stop swinging like metronome between hopes and illusions that somebody will come to save us, on one hand, and panic that nobody is coming. We have to do our best inside ourselves. Our reforms, transformation of our society, the increasing production of our armaments, we started to do that instead of selling it around the world to everybody. So we started to reform the army and producing the means for self-defense. We had to work during the crisis. I saw some Chinese colleagues here. They will correct me if I'm not right. There is a Chinese word crisis, so it sounds like Wei Ji. Wei means danger. Ji means chance. So crisis gives a chance to survive. So we have to work, not to wait that somebody will come and improve situations on our behalf. We are to bring reforms. Through these reforms, we are bringing understanding to the colleagues in Europe and the United States. Well, what is the main rule for business? If you are thinking that the new president will follow the business rules, the main rule of business is to create the stable, a comfortable environment for business. If it is about international business, it means that stable environment should be brought. There is instability around the world. So my point is that Trump's outlook is more nationalist than isolationist, because what he's doing, he's narrowing the American interest, contrary to what his predecessors did. So we have to work and to be helpful in understanding that the interest of one country in this globalized world is the interest of others. So it is, I am more optimistic in understanding that United States will remain in global affairs. It's not easy to move out. If it is, so we have to propose as partners to United States and Europe what for we exist in that part of the Europe. We are existing there for stability, and this stability is in ourselves. Ukraine is a problem now, but this is a solution. At the same time, if you create a stable, democratic society, so it will stabilize the situation in that part of the world. Of course, we need partners. We need partnership. You can't press any government, including the United States, do this or that, do that. But we count on the commitments which were forged previously. And I can't even imagine how United States new administration is going to withdraw its signature, where United States was a co-sponsor in the United Nations on the resolution territorial integrity of Ukraine in March 2014. Well, hardly it's possible. It means that we are to work together and to demonstrate we are partners. Partnership, it is a tango. It is not single breakdowns. So it means that we are not only to demand from somebody, we have to propose what we can do for stability in Europe, to other reforms, for the non-proliferation process, which brutally destroyed by Russia when within the Budapest Memorandum, but United States and the President Trump several times accented on the importance for the United States and non-proliferation regime. We stand it as a big partner in this process, and we are to to renounce our readiness to be a leader. So it means that we are to look inside Ukraine, how to bring reforms, to forge ourselves from inside, and naturally we are to bring arguments why partnership with Europe, with the United States is so important for them and for us.
Okay, I've just written a note to myself that says be concise when you answer. But if we could also have short questions, Stephen?
Just very, very brief questions for each of you. Ambassador Sergeyev, you talk about partnership between Ukraine and the West. I think that partnership has to be based on, as Tom said, on specific reforms. And I think the IMF has been a little too vague in terms of giving money, granting loans, shall we say, to Ukraine, because obviously we want Ukraine to survive. But the bottom line is, I think the money should be very specific. The parts of the money should be specified or connected to specific reforms, and not only to legislate them, but to implement them. That's the big problem in Ukraine from my point of view. Tom, as far as Russia is concerned, I totally agree with you. Sanctions have to be oriented towards specific results. They're too general at this point, and each sanction should be related. This is my opinion, to a specific action taken by the Russian government. Not to double down on the present sanctions, but to really specify, if you want to release such and such a sanction, then you have to do A, B, C. I'd like your comment on that. And as far as David is concerned, I think the biggest short-term problem in Europe, not just Central Europe, are the election campaigns in Netherlands, France, and Germany, and perhaps Italy, and the disinformation campaign that is currently being waged, that was waged here very successfully by Putin, and Europe is really not doing anything about it. They're talking, but except for the Czech Republic, for example, and maybe Germany, but Germany is just talking about it. They're not countering this, and this disinformation can really affect their elections and cause the right wing to get, to become more popular, more seats in parliament. So I like your comments on that. Thank you.
Thank you for your question. So my answer is very, very simple. IMF, it is not a gift. This is something we should return in years, but it will be our debt. It means that when taking money from a bank, you are trying to invest them in the right way, to make money works, either bringing money or bringing some benefits. I absolutely agree that any foreign debt, any foreign loans, any foreign assistance, this should be rightly channeled to specific areas which will bring closer the reforms in Ukraine. It's clear. Otherwise, we'll spend money for nothing, or they will disappear in offshores, as we know about Panamas.
But not just to legislate, but to implement.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, well, I think there probably is a disinformation campaign. I mean, we know that money has come to the Front National several years ago. On the other hand, it's sort of, I have the same view that I have about the American election and the Russian efforts there. And whatever they did, it didn't matter. The reason Clinton lost was because of Clinton's campaign. They forgot that there were people in Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and Michigan who had issues that were serious and real. And in Europe, there is, we know, well, I mean, we know, I put the no in quotes, but we know that there's been support given to the PVV in the Netherlands. I mean, there are a number of parties, I think, in that populist realm in Central and Eastern Europe. And there are, of course, in the Baltic states, there are pro-Russian parties. One of them being in the government now, one of the governments. So we know that's going on. On the other hand, the real problems in Europe, it seems to me, are of the Europeans making. And so this is just sort of icing on the cake. And if Marine Le Pen becomes president in France, I don't think she will. I think it's pretty clear she won't, although she's leading in the polls right now on the first round. It won't be because of the Russians, it'll be because of what has happened in French politics and French economic policy and the EU, and it seems to me that that's. So your question is, what are the Europeans doing about it? Well, I suppose they're probably talking right now to all of the people in the intelligence community here, finding out, well, now how did they do that? How did they get into the DNC? And how did they get Podesta's email and so forth? And what can we do about this? And who are all these individuals with these strange names? And but the real problems are in what's happening in Europe, it seems to me. And I mean, if you have the PVV leading in the Netherlands, you have the Danish People's Party leading in Denmark, you have Marine Le Pen leading in France, you have the UK on its way out of the EU, the AFD is undoubtedly going to get seats in the national parliament in September. I mean, Europe has Five Star is one of the leading parties, if not the leading party in Italy. So there are huge problems that are of the Europeans making, and the Europeans aren't doing a very good job addressing them. So I don't, Russian disinformation,
Russia is supporting all these parties.
Yeah,
so
yeah.
they're able to convey the message much more strongly.
Yeah, but they get a lot of, all I'm saying is they get a lot of popular support from people. And I don't know, maybe I can't imagine they're going to figure out, we weren't able to deal with it, at least while it was happening. Maybe they'll learn something from the American campaign. I don't know. I'm not into the intelligence community way to know whether they figured out what the secret is to contain that effort, but clearly it's going on. It's been going on for years. I mean, look at the Ukrainian elections in the past, so. I mean, it seems to me Putin is the kind of operator that when he sees that there is an advantageous opening, he'll take it. And if you leave your computer systems open, there's the DNC problem. Well, someone's going to hack, right? So, but you're right. I know you're right, but it's hard to really imagine that the Europeans are going to be able to figure out how to deal with it. It seems to me that, I mean, just this is a bit of an aside. We haven't talked much about this, but it does seem to me that from the point of view of such issues as intelligence, the Europeans have an equally large problem in coordinating their information in counterterrorism. I mean, the first instance to get, for example, all of the intelligence operations in one country, such as France, to communicate and share information, and then to try to work together, even though we know they don't like to share information with anyone. So that's a huge problem that is yet another aspect of the crisis that exists in Europe.
So the Soviet Union was was a master at disinformation. The Soviet KGB was. They just lost their country at the end. So, I mean, I think we need to put this in perspective. Is there another question? Have we managed to answer everything? Okay, if there are no more questions, thank you very much for spending time with us this evening. I hope you come away with a lot more questions about what the administration's policy is going to be, certainly not with answers, because we didn't provide them. Thank you.